Hello, everybody. I'm Chelsea with MADVoters.
And I'm Julia Chester with Moms Demand Action.
June is National Gun Violence Awareness Month, and we've just come off of Wear Orange Weekend. I don't know how many of you were a part of any events that took place. We had a beautiful vigil up here in Delaware County. Um, it was very emotional, I've heard, for a lot of people. Um, we're here today with some of our MVPs, which are our MADVoters verified politicians who are also gun sense candidates. We'll be talking more about gun violence in Indiana and the importance of gun safety today. To start us off, Julia, could you tell us a little bit more about the organization Moms Demand Action and just what Wear Orange Weekend means?
Yeah, so Moms Demand Action is a grassroots, nonpartisan movement for Americans who advocate for public safety measures that can protect people from gun violence. And we have a chapter in every state and in the District of Columbia. So we're a partner under the umbrella of Everytown for Gun Safety. That includes Mayors Against Illegal Guns, Students Demand Action, and the Everytown Survivor Network. And we're part of the nation's largest gun violence prevention organization with over 10 million supporters. And we just had our Wear Orange weekend, and some of the background for Wear Orange is that on January 21st, 2013, Hadiya Pendleton was a high school student from the south side of Chicago, and she marched in President Obama's second inaugural parade. However, 1 week later, she was shot and killed in a playground in Chicago. So her childhood friends decided to commemorate her life by wearing orange. This is the color that hunters wear in the woods to protect themselves and others. The Wear Orange movement, or National Gun Violence Awareness Day, originated on June 2nd, 2015, which would have been Hadiya's 18th birthday. So now it's observed nationally on the first Friday in June and the following weekend. And wearing orange serves as a way to honor the more than 120 lives that are cut short and hundreds more that are wounded by gun violence every day.
Absolutely. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what it means to be a gun sense candidate?
Sure. And maybe the gun sense candidates can even talk more about that. But in general, we started a program that helps candidates get elected through, in large part, their platform related to gun safety measures. And since 2018, we've had 15,000 candidates that have received the distinction of being a gun sense candidate. If candidates are interested in becoming a gun sense candidate, we talk with people in our states, and they're given a survey to fill out, and based on their answers to the survey, they will receive the distinction. And it provides an opportunity to really place gun violence prevention in a prominent place in the candidate's portfolio of proposed legislation and issues that are important to Americans.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask the candidates to go ahead and introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Victoria.
Hi, everybody. Yes, Victoria Garcia Wilburn. I am the incumbent for State House District 32, which is very exciting. This is the second time I have been a gun sense candidate, and I take that very seriously. My first session in office, I partnered with my colleague, Representative Mitch Gore, and we authored a piece of legislation that mirrored federal law, which meant that conversion switches, which actually turn single shot weapons into deadly, nearly machine gun capacity rifles, weapons, guns. And excuse me, I don't fully understand all of the gun vernacular because I myself am not a gun owner. So my husband will always correct me as he is former police. But these conversion switches are also called Glock switches because they can easily go on a Glock and they're banned federally. However, a huge holdup for our local prosecution was that we had to wait for federal prosecution. And all of law enforcement and even the gun industry agreed that that was a wise idea to bring in some local prosecution. And then I will say that I gladly went toe to toe with the NRA this last session. Unfortunately, there was a bill authored by Representative Chris Jeter in District 88 that prevented the allowability of prosecution for the gun industry in northern Indiana. A very slippery slope in the legal world prevented what is known as discovery, so more evidence that was able to be shared, which we know helped industries like the tobacco industry and the opioid industry really understand the magnitude and impact of false advertising and inappropriate marketing. And so that was stripped away from us, unfortunately. And so very devastating to my colleague, Senator Rodney Pohl. But I'm not done yet. And there is so much work to be done. And Hoosiers, we cannot lose hope. So I'm asking you to look at candidates and what they stand for in a global perspective. Understand that supermajorities are dangerous for democracy and that we have a real opportunity to break that for these wonderful candidates that you're going to meet in a few minutes.
Amazing, thank you. And I have loved watching this legislation come forward. It's so important, even if we can't get legislation passed, that Hoosiers know the language. They understand what they're allowed to ask for. And so bravo on the legislation that you have written and co-authored. It's wonderful. Joel, we would love to hear from you.
Hey everyone, I'm Joel Levi. So yeah, I'm the Democratic candidate for State Senate District 20. Oh, sorry, was I muted the whole time?
Yeah, you were muted for a sec.
Okay, so sorry. Can you hear me all right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. So everyone, I'm Joel Levi, and I'm the Democratic candidate for State Senate District 20, which represents Carmel, Noblesville, and Cicero. So I personally feel passionate about background checks in the state of Indiana. So I have a 5-year-old son that's in preschool going into kindergarten this fall at Hamilton Heights. And to me, one of the things that seems just unfair and sort of egregious is the fact that you can have a criminal record, you can have a record of domestic violence and still legally buy a gun from a private seller in Indiana. And to me, that doesn't seem right. It seems like a loophole that's unnecessary. And what you see is that violence can actually lead to more violence. And it's one thing that is a steep hill to climb. It will definitely require bipartisan effort. But it's something I personally feel passionate about. It's a big reason why I entered this race. And running in this district, there's a lot of hurdles, but I'm following my heart, trying to do the right thing for my son, trying to keep the state a safer place. And yeah, just trying to make efforts in that area. So yeah, I just feel like a lot of people, probably both sides of the aisle or moderates, could agree that background checks make sense, especially if you consider the fact that like people with criminal records and histories of abuse can still now have a legal pathway to purchasing a firearm.
Thank you, Joel. And yeah, you know, having a kid going into kindergarten, I think that there are a lot of people in the US who have kids going into kindergarten and they're a little worried, you know.
Yeah.
I think that that's a feeling we can all kind of understand.
Yeah, when you see tragedies like Uvalde and Nashville, my wife and I, we lived in Nashville, Tennessee for 7 years, so we're very familiar with that situation at the Covenant School. It just, I mean, those kind of scenarios are the closest thing to pure evil that you can really think of. So to see a party sort of deflect or defer just doesn't seem right, doesn't sit well in my heart, and it's just like, it sort of just like got me up out of my couch and said, well, I can either like keep yelling at my TV or run and try to change some policy and do the right thing and just try to make the state a better place. So yeah, that's why I'm sort of doing this and putting myself out there. And yeah, there's some exciting things happening in Indiana this year, especially with breaking the supermajority. and Hamilton County in general. I'm really excited about it. So I think there could be some surprising races this year. So
Absolutely. And we're so glad that you're here and championing for Hoosiers.
thank you.
Matt, we'd love to hear from you now.
First of all, I'd like to thank Representative Garcia Wilburn for the work that she did. Very successful first term, pretty phenomenal. Not only with the gun bill, with the machine gun Glock switch bill, but she also had a very important mental health bill that was passed. So she's done great work already, and look forward to seeing what she's got ahead of her. So my name is Matt McNally. I am a retired military officer. I served for 22 years. I'm also a veteran of Afghanistan, and I was a what's called a federal flight deck officer, which is the if you recall, after September 11th, the Department of Homeland Security opened up a program where pilots could be trained as law enforcement officers. We had a very small jurisdiction. It was only the cockpit of an aircraft, and I am also a second-time gun sense candidate in 2022 and again in 2024. And one of my biggest concerns, it's a very small thing, I believe it's a small thing, is safe storage legislation. We have seen an increase in deaths and injuries amongst children due to unattended firearms, with no seeming consequences for the owners of those firearms. And unfortunately, we are at a position where now even legislation like safe storage is being pushed by the NRA as a violation of the Second Amendment. So first it was, and so we're seeing them push to the point where even looking at a gun at some point, they're going to basically claim as a violation of the Second Amendment. And that is not the opinion of most Americans, and it's not the opinion of most Hoosiers, regardless of which side of the aisle you sit on. And so what we're seeing again is that those small voices influencing the supermajority, and everybody jump on board. And we have a lot of work to do, and I'm excited to continue to do that work.
Thank you so much, Matt. Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks for organizing this. I appreciate you, MADVoters. I'm a huge fan. Everyone, hey, I'm Nate Anderson. I am the Democratic candidate out here in District 53, which is Greenfield, New Pal, Pendleton, this little area out here. So 18 years plus in the Army. I'm a combat veteran of Iraq. I'm blessed enough to reach the rank of first sergeant for the 54th SFAB, which it's an honor to serve those who serve. Civilian wise, I'm a school resource officer in law enforcement and stuff. So I have a very interesting perspective based off facts and realities that I'm seeing. And a little disclaimer, what I say is my opinions based off my own experiences, not the opinions of my employer or the Indiana Army National Guard. So I've worked with at-risk youth for ages. First started with the Hoosier Youth Challenge Academy. Kind of had this passion with law enforcement, doing the right thing by people, being the voice of the victims. And so that's kind of how I meshed both, working with kids, working in law enforcement. That's why I ended up landing up as a SRO. So I'm excited to speak about this important topic and try to add a little context just based off my perspective as a police officer on the south side of Indianapolis.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited to hear your perspective. I think everybody on this call has a very different perspective to share. And I think, Hoosiers can really relate to that. Okay, so we've prepared a few questions for you. At the end, the audience that is with us, if you guys have questions, we'll get to those questions. So question number 1. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death for Hoosier kids. We have seen some horrible stories this past year, horrible. It's a nationwide problem as well. How did we get here? And we're actually going to start with you, Nate.
Thank you for the question. This is quite personal to me. Just within this year alone, I've responded to 2 homicides where I've been the first officer on scene. And both kids have been former students of ours that have been gunned down in public spaces. And there was no amount of first aid that could have saved their lives. One was over a sale of marijuana that just the other person didn't want to pay for. I just killed him in the car. And the other one is still under investigation, that he was pronounced dead right there in the parking lot. I think there's several factors that bleed into this that contribute to the overall gun violence problem. To begin with, when the state of Indiana went away from the gun permits, that took a huge check and balance away. And to those naysayers who say, well, criminals are going to get the guns anyways, well, you know what? Yes, but it's a deterrent, right? And if someone violates that law, then there's repercussions. And so usually that's a good deterrent. That's like saying we need to get rid of all laws because criminals are going to still break the law. It makes no sense. And so that argument is just absolutely absurd and based in ignorance. But so that's check one, right? We got rid of the gun permit. Now we have this constitutional carry, which is a very mislabeled phrase, or, it's very mislabeled, very misleading. And so from my perspective, what I have seen on the south side of Indy, working with our kiddos in that environment, there's been a huge uptick in violence. Part of that is because our young kids just love that culture. They want to fit in. They're infatuated with that type of culture too. So, a lot of these folks that we are getting guns from, what's common is Glock switches. What's common is extended magazines, no holsters. It's in the front of their pants, that type of thing. It's a cultural thing. But I do think there's a lot of things that feed into this. And I'm sure other panelists here can have a different perspective. Just that from my lens, that's what I'm looking at is the kid side is motivated to fit in and to be somebody and to try to get that fast cash. And they're immersed in that culture. So that's my take on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting to look at it from the perspective of these children. That's not a perspective that I would have. And maybe not something that I would necessarily think about as far as like fitting in, because that wasn't my experience. Matt, I would love to hear from you.
So I would agree with Nate that there is a cultural aspect, but I'll go a little bit deeper than that. In the 70s and 80s, when you look at advertising for guns, it was about hunting, it was about sport. It was advertised as a utility. As one of the studies has shown that over 85% of gun owners own multiple guns. So there becomes a point where the utility of the gun is no longer what sells the gun. So they have to start changing the advertising. So then it became cultural. The NRA actually hired an ad agency that's been their sole ad agency forever. And that was one of their recommendations was, let's make this about a culture. So with that shifting time, the gun industry has changed their advertising from let's go hunting, let's go fishing, let's have hunter safety, to more fear-based, more sentiment, feeling, emotional based types of advertising. Like, you have to protect your family. This is about patriotism. This is about self-defense. And they've been quite successful doing that. And if you talk to a lot of gun owners, that is one of the reasons why they gun. It's kind of like, buying a Jeep versus buying a Toyota Camry, right? They both have the utility of a car. But if you can sell that there's this adventure of a Jeep, you can go drive in the mountains and cross the rivers, people will get excited about that and go buy that Jeep. And what I've noticed in particular over the last 10 years is that cultural aspect is digging in more and more. And it's no longer just affecting gun ownership. It's affecting an entire mindset of a group of people and how we view not just gun ownership, but our government and things along those lines.
Absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'll chime in, Chelsea, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate both Nate and Matt's perspective, but I think one thing to be real clear is that these are not those children. These are our children. And actually, the majority of children that die by gunshot wound is unintentional. And so that relates back to safe storage. And I will say there has been what we like to call in the super minority is pebble progress. And so when my colleague, Representative Maureen Bauer, was able to slip in an amendment that allowed for education regarding safe storage to school-age children, that was a huge victory. We never like to think about the worst case scenario happening, but when we don't think about it, we can't plan or prevent. And so this is completely preventable and the responsible thing to do, but we have made national headlines time and again for toddlers walking around with guns in their apartment complexes. We have made national headlines for brothers, 5-year-old brothers, unfortunately, unintentionally killing their 2-year-old sister. These are the worst case scenarios, unimaginable, but they have become a part of our daily narrative to the point where we have become numb to it. Now, I do want to talk about what's being done federally for just a moment. So again, myself and colleague Representative Maureen Bauer were appointed to the first ever Gun Violence Prevention Task Force through the White House that convened state legislators from all 50 states to idea share to help combat the problem of gun violence, particularly in youth and our public safety and military. And so this is an issue that affects us all. This isn't an inner city issue. This isn't something that where guns know the boundary between, in my district, for example, Marion County and Hamilton County. Irresponsible gun ownerships affects everyone. Guns are stolen out of vehicles. Not too long ago, 2 summers ago, my local police department did a campaign about don't store your guns in your car. And so I really want to shift that narrative that this isn't just an us versus them. This is an all of us issue, and it will take all of us coming together to understand that change is necessary and needed. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our continued support for allowing law enforcement agencies to use technology to better equip their agencies so that they have a better view of the problems and the gaps in their own community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Joel, what do you think? How did we get here?
That's a great question. I think about this from just honestly my own perspective, my own view of just being a parent. This is my first time running. And just so when I just look at like the cultural or the political landscape, I just keep coming back to this idea of just like common sense. And I guess what we have, because there is this sort of cultural shift or like, Victoria said, just like this us versus them mentality of just like, I think a lot of parents, Democrat or Republican, would say that like having a safer state is a good thing. And so, for example, just like the one thing that I keep coming back to, because it just makes so much common sense to me, is like, why can you have a criminal record? Why can you have a record of domestic abuse and still purchase a firearm legally? And I think what you have here is there's a lot of layers to this. It's not just common sense. Like when I'm knocking doors, I'm talking parent to parent. I think a lot of voters agree, yeah, that seems like a loophole that shouldn't exist. But what you have on the political sort of sphere is this Republican mindset, and I'm not trying to make an us versus them, but they operate out of a sense of fear to the NRA because they have this constituency, because they have this sort of lobbying effort that really shifts their mindset from like actually implementing common sense policy and not wanting to lose their job or getting primaried. So what you have is actually these elected officials not really representing the moderate voters and the constituents in their actual district. They're operating out of fear rather than trying to do the right thing to keep children safe. And I think that's honestly just what brought me into action of just like when if elected into office, like I don't want to navigate or make policy based out of fear. Like I want to navigate and do the right thing to keep children safe. And if there's a loophole, let's close it. Like if there is an actual step where we can reach across the aisle and actually save lives, that may be the closest thing to like being a hero that I know of just like this is what legislation can do. And as a parent, as someone that, you know, it's my first time running, I said that before, like it just makes common sense. And so how we got here, I think has a lot of layers, you know, that other candidates can speak to more, but where I am as a parent is like, let's do something. Let's not call each other names. Let's do something to keep our children and our state safe.
100%. And for the record, I spoke to a lot of police officers after they took away those carry licenses, and every single one of them that I spoke to said it was a bad idea. And so when you have law enforcement officers, people who are dealing with people with guns, saying, hey, you know, this, we weren't for this, I think that that reflects really poorly on our legislature. And I think most Hoosiers would agree that that was a bad move. It reflects badly on our supermajority. Let me make that clear, because I know that there are some great people in our General Assembly fighting against these horrible mistakes. Before we move on to the next question, Julia, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I was sitting here nodding my head because all of the comments from everyone on the panel were right on, and so I really don't have anything to add.
Okay. All right. Well, good job, candidates.
Before we move on, Chelsea, can I mention one thing that Nate mentioned that was so important? So important. He talked about belonging. And what's happened in 2 decades of a supermajority control is that vital after-school programming, vital community organizations that cater to youth 8 through 17, the funding for those programs has been methodically stripped away. And what happens is when children are exposed to high-level adverse childhood experiences, they need multiple protective factors to keep them in the straight and narrow, right? The right path. But by cutting funding of these social services that benefit the entire community, we have left children in dire straits and questioning how and where they belong. And when left to their own devices, that will trend negative. And so I thought that that was a really great point that Nate brought up, is that we are all looking for a sense of belonging. And we need that belonging to be positive. And that typically happens in school and after school environments. But when we take away public education funding, and we take away vital funding to safety net programs, we take away literal safety for children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People who are not in these situations don't understand that some children are not safe at home, that school is sometimes the only safe space for them. And, you know, hopefully there's some kind of after school program for them as well. But the truth is, most places don't, especially rural places in Indiana. There is not enough access. Sean, we're going to get to your questions at the very end. For now, we're going to talk to the candidates. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so every legislative session, which we've already talked about, some of the bills that we've seen and some of the bills that Victoria has authored, safe storage laws, raising the minimum age to carry, these don't move forward. Why do you think that is? And how do you think we can get these policies passed? And you know what, Victoria, let's start with you because you have a lot of experience in this realm.
I love how you think one term is a lot of experience, Chelsea. Too much confidence in me. But I think we start at the basic level. And I'm going to be very truthful right now, which is I know what MADVoters really appreciates. Every Democrat in the state house can be absent on any given day. And committees still happen. Votes are still cast. bills are still heard. That is the reality of a supermajority. It is totalitarian government. They don't need to hear my bill. They don't need my vote. They don't need my amendment. And that is a scary place to be. We know that the majority of people are not represented. So again, Mitch Gore, myself, Representative Bauer, we wrote a bill asking for accountability, asking for adults to be held accountable to storing their gun in a responsible manner. And if they did not, and the unimaginable happened, they would be held accountable. It is devastating when the unimaginable happens, but we need society to shift and change in a supermajority. And so we felt that that was one strategy in order to make that change. Chairwoman did not hear that bill. They do not have to entertain any Democrat-authored bills. It is very, very dangerous. So I really want to impress upon listeners that truly I am a person of hope. I love to instill hope. I want to bring others around me to hope. But the reality of it is that we are in a very grim situation when you only hear one view, one mindset, and one party.
Thank you for saying it out loud. I think it's something that everybody needs to hear. We have a, they were calling it trifecta, but I mean, it goes further than that. Our Secretary of State, our Attorney General, it is a supermajority across the board, and Hoosiers are not being heard. Joel, what do you think? Do you agree with Representative Garcia Wilburn on this?
I do. She has way more experience, obviously, than I do, and I'm definitely the new guy here, so I need to be very clear about that. And I'm so thankful to her experience and what she's doing in the State House. But just from a candidate's perspective, it just seems like, yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party is being disregarded, not heard. The way forward, that's a complicated question. I mean, I keep coming back to the parent thing, but it's just like we have to maybe have language that can sort of supersede party, and because it's more than party right now, it's identity politics. So people aren't just voting against you, they're voting for themselves. And I think unlocking that or figuring out how to find unity is the $1 million question in America right now. Because right now you see people capitalizing on, separation, people digging in, in these primaries, and it's just like, it just doesn't allow any policy to go through, or any collaboration, because I think the word has to be collaboration right now, and you just don't see that. So unless that happens, I don't see how any of these sort of common sense bills could go through.
Right, absolutely. Matt, I would love to know, I want to kind of feed off of what Joel was saying. Do you have any ideas on what that magic ingredient might be? How do we come together?
Well, I do want to disagree with one thing that Joel said. Joel said the Democratic Party isn't being heard. And while he is correct, the reality is it's our constituents that aren't being heard. Our representatives are not representing the majority voice of our constituents. We know, again, the majority of people, the majority of Hoosiers, the majority of Americans want safe storage. The majority of Americans want background checks on private sales. These are again, are simple things that we can do that will reduce gun violence. What I have found in my discussions, and again, I come from a military background. I have a lot of gun owners, friends who are gun owners. I'm a gun owner myself. And when you talk to people, again, at the doors, party aside, I've had those conversations and they all agree with me. We all share the same general idea, but I think what ends up happening is the divisive language comes in and it becomes an us versus them. And I think when we approach it from a an area of just a common sense, hey, look, what do you think about background checks on private sales? And they're at first they're kind of apprehensive, but when you talk about the process, look, if I'm selling you a gun in Indiana right now, I can just sell you a gun. But with a background check, all we have to do is you and I go to the FFL, fill out the 4473. They do the NICS check. We give them $50. He's happy because the FFL is happy because they got a $50 check for one phone call. I'm happy because selling my gun, I now have a paperwork trail that I don't have to worry about. The guy buying the gun's happy because he knows it's legit. And I think that that's a very simple way to keep that guns out of the hands of people who don't want guns. And that's something that, or I'm sorry, keeping them out of the hands of people who shouldn't have guns. And that's something when I talk about gun safety, a very common point brought up is keeping the guns out of the people who shouldn't have them. That's the simplest way to do it, in my opinion. But again, it's just taking party out of the equation, just having normal conversations, friendly conversations with people. And we agree. A lot of us agree.
I always say I want to leave somebody's house, maybe not changing their mind, but I want to leave knowing that I made them think. And I think that these are the conversations that we can come back to, and hopefully they'll experience broader conversations on those topics. Nate, I would love to hear if you have anything to add about this. Maybe you know the secret ingredient to bringing us all together.
Well, it's definitely not sugar and spice and everything nice. I'll tell you that. That'd be too daggone easy, wouldn't it? It kind of reminds me of a story from when I was running for mayor out here in Greenfield, and one of my coworkers asked, like, on your signs, it doesn't really say that you're a Democrat. I don't see a donkey anywhere. What's up with that? And are you ashamed? Like, first of all, it's not about being ashamed, but it's trying to cut through the divisiveness and having those conversations. So people go to my website, yeah, they'll see right there that I'm the Democrat candidate, but I want to be able to have those conversations without folks shutting down. And there is way more that we can agree on than disagree. And that's when, in the areas that we disagree on, that's where we can develop compromise and learn from one another and try to get things done for the betterment of our communities, right? So, this also reminds me of the story about last year during the summer. I responded to a bunch of juveniles, bless their hearts, enjoying their summer unattended. They didn't have any adult supervision, but they ended up, there's a lady that drove a Jeep Wrangler. Top sides were down. She backs into a store. She goes inside. Well, she has a gun, and it's with one of those magnetic holsters underneath the dash. Kids walk up. One distracts a gardener that's outside watering plants by where she parked. Another kid reaches in real quick, grabs the pistol, and off they went to the apartment complex. So. And there's no repercussions for that negligence. And that weapon was then used, of course, in a crime later. And there's no repercussions. What we're asking here is common sense stuff that the military has done for decades, that makes sense, that doesn't violate your constitutional right to protect yourself and your family and others. And so having like background checks, having permits that validate that, yes, you are a person that should be legally carrying a firearm, having those red flags where somebody who's mental, emotional, having mental health crisis, they're homicidal or suicidal, we can temporarily take those weapons, hold them safely while that person gets treated. And the moment they get treated and they get the check okay, that gets returned to them without cause. There's actually no fees associated to that. It's free. It's about the betterment of the community. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. Indiana is way more purple and progressive than what people think. Almost 13% of registered voters came out to vote last municipal election to decide who the mayor was going to be and who the city council was going to be here in the city of Greenfield, where I live. That's it. 13% is what did it. We have a voter turnout problem. And it's because consistently, I feel like, and that's one of the reasons why I'm in this race, and I'm inspired by you, Joel. I'm right there with you, to get into this, because if not us, then who? You know, a lot of these seats are running uncontested. So this is going to be a marathon. It's not a sprint. And we know that. Getting out here, having conversations like this, building momentum, trying to cut through that rhetoric, rebranding the messaging, combating the false narratives of the far right, you know, about us coming to take your guns. That's not true at all. I think that's the ingredients. You know, we are in a marathon. It's these little things. I love the saying, you know, pebble, you know, that was great. I get it. That was hilarious. So I think that's kind of where we're at, you know, and that's realities. I know that out here is a huge conservative district, but when I actually look at the numbers, we have a voting turnout problem, like I mentioned. And for me, what I did last election cycle as a run for mayor, door knocking, canvassing, that's where it was at, talking to people, just walking up to folks in restaurants, you know, like the local breweries, saying, hey, I'm running for mayor out here. How are you? I'd love to talk to you sometime. Here's my card, you know, give me a holler or send me an email. I think making those personal connections is where we're going to win this and provide balance. We ranked second best state to start a business in this state, which is great, but we ranked 7th worst state to live. And that just shows you the imbalance we have in our own society. And Hoosiers, I know Hoosiers are ready for a change. So hopefully those little ingredients can give us a little victory in the long run.
Chelsea, I hope you wrote down that recipe.
I actually really agree with Nate, and I have kind of very similar messaging about, you know, we can put things aside that we don't agree on now and deal with what we do agree on, or, you know, later, and deal with what we do agree on now. I want to mention there are unopposed seats still this year, though we do have more seats and butts. We have unopposed seats. And so anybody who may be watching this, if you're interested in running, we are happy to help you with that. We need people to have choices. And when people find out they have choices, they get very excited. So no, even these disenfranchised voters, when they hear that they have somebody to look at on their ballot, they are happy. So do that for your constituents. We can do this together for sure. Before we move on, Julia, from the Moms Demand side of things, do you have any ideas on how we move forward in pushing this legislation in Indiana?
Like I said before, it's everything that everyone just mentioned. You know, it has to be a multifaceted approach. It's a very complex situation, and it took a long time to get here, right? So all of these sayings, marathon, not a sprint, you know, these are things that we have been telling people for a long time, you know, since we started. I started right in the beginning with Moms Demand when it started here in Indiana. So I've been doing this for what is that, 11 years now, so 11 or 12 years now. So you know, somehow we just have to keep going and rolling those pebbles. You know, so it's you know, it's I think a key part of it is the education, is the, you know, reduction in fear and breaking down the barriers we have with identity politics. You know, it's almost like collaboration is seen as a sign of weakness, and we have to get past that to show that, you know, we're all on the same. We have more, like was previously said, we have more things in common than we have differences.
Absolutely. Collaboration is my favorite thing in the world, by the way. I think that makes us all much stronger. And I'm so happy to see everybody here today, because this is a collaboration. This is an effort where we can educate people together. I would love to ask you this, Nate, as somebody who has training as a police officer and in this field, what are some common misconceptions about gun safety? And can you set the record straight on any of these?
What a great question. You know, on one side, I get from my some of my friends and colleagues that say, you know, any impediment is a violation of my constitutional right. It says shall not infringe. You know, and that's part of the conversation. In all actuality, there's scholars will say that it says well-regulated militia and the right to bear arms. It says right there regulated, you know, for you know, and it's together. So what I'd like to tell people is that, you know, there's a reason why we can't have machine guns. That's illegal, right? There's a reason why you can't just have your own tank and explosives and stuff. We are able to protect ourselves in our homes against possible lethal threats. You know, in the state of Indiana, you can protect against life. You can't protect against property. We don't necessarily have like a stand your ground law in this state, which a lot of folks think that, and that's necessarily not the case. And they think you can carry everywhere, and you can't. You can't carry everywhere you want to. And that's just how it is. So a business owner, for example, can say, no, you can't carry in my business, Simon Malls, for example. And the person has to leave. And if not, they get trespassed, you know, and if they come back, they get arrested for trespass. You can't carry on universities and you can't carry on schools. Of course, there's also government buildings and stuff like that. From my perspective, there is a gross negligence of safety in our population when it comes to guns. Part of that is both types of cultures that come to play here, where they think one side thinks it's cool, the other side thinks it's constitutional rights, but they don't take the time to learn the technology and the safety mechanisms, the trigger placement, marksmanship, all the stuff that goes into it, proper storage. And I think that's why we are seeing a huge uptick in negligence, accidental fires, accidental homicides, and it's because of all those things. Now, I will say that, you know, even in the Indian Army National Guard, there's June is stand down month, right? In recognition of that, I send out leaks to my soldiers to get a hold of free gun locks, you know, and to educate them. You know, that's part of our climate command survey. Is talks about gun safety and storage and stuff like that. I mean, we take this stuff seriously. We're trained professionals, for goodness sakes. You know, we go to the range at least twice a year, you know, or at least once a year. And so I find it very interesting that there seems to be some gap here in some of the messaging and whatnot. So just like with hunter's education, which is brought up, and that's why we wore orange here recently, in order to hunt in the state of Indiana, you have to go through the online course. That online course educates the person on laws, when they can and cannot shoot, safety, muzzle awareness, trigger awareness, all these proper storage, you know, what animals are in season. I don't see why we can't have something similar for regular carry, something that's just you know, education piece, something similar, you know. And there's a lady at work that works as a treasurer for one of our elementaries, and she said, my husband bought a gun and that thing's still out in the garage because I won't let him to come and, you know, bring it in the house, you know. And he has it in the garage because he doesn't know how to use it. And she's like, until you go to and you get training, you're not going to have it in the house, you know. That's just how it is. So it kind of defeats the purpose, you know, to even having a firearm if you're going to use it for home protection, you know. So anyway, so that's my 2 cents when it comes to that. That's kind of where I see the gaps.
It's like a car, right? You wouldn't get a manual that you don't know how to drive. I also think if we're letting people drive around in these giant murder machines, they should have license for guns too, right? And have to go through courses. It just,
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I was stationed out in Iowa, and they actually put together a 2-day in-person class. There's exceptions for veterans and law enforcement, but if you're a part of the normal citizenry, in order to get a permit to carry concealed, so outside your dwelling, you have to go to this course. 1 day was just laws, right? And the next day was marksmanship and liability, and it educates the folks. There was a waiver process if you couldn't financially support that course. But where these courses were held at mom and pop gun shops, that had indoor ranges. So there's a multiplier effect on the local economy that helped build these local businesses up, these local mom and pop shops, which is great for local areas. I got a gun shop right up the road that would probably love some business like that. And they have to, these gun owners, or I'm sorry, the business owners, they have to get licensed, of course, and certified. They teach the block of instruction. So there's a lot of states that are doing things that are really cool, that again don't inhibit upon our constitutional rights, but obviously allows that education piece. And when you have that education, you have competency. When you have that education, you see it positively impacts the reduction of negligence, the reduction of theft, and it's just a positive multiplier.
Right. Well, and you hit on a lot of common misconceptions about here in Indiana and firearms. So thank you for that. And honestly, looking over our questions that we had prepared, you guys hit on everything. So I want to kind of take the time now just to give each of you an opportunity to say whatever else that you are wanting to say about this topic. If there's something that you want to talk about that you didn't get hit on yet, like I'd like to hear from you. And Matt, we haven't gotten a chance to hear from you too much. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you.
So I wanted to address what Nate put out, but also kind of reaffirm some of that. So I was stationed in Texas. And Texas used to have a requirement that if you wanted to conceal carry, you had to attend a weekend course. And that course had testing on marksmanship, legal kind of explanations of your rights, and then there was a written test at the end. And if you were, again, to Nate's point, if you were military trained, you could bypass the course with proof of a expert or above, or I'm sorry, sharpshooter or above from the military. You could bypass that training course, and it was it's good because again, it does generate business, but it also ensures that your gun carrying public is safe. They're trained, they know what to do, they know where they can and cannot have it. And the problem, I think, with the recent permitless carry laws is I remember when I was applying for my permit in 2008, I did the due diligence required to see what do I need to do to have a permit? What are the requirements? And I did that because and I find that when people go through a process like that, they're then more responsible because they don't want to lose that permit. What we've essentially done is said, you don't have to do that due diligence. I'm sorry. You don't have to do that due diligence. You can just buy that gun, carry it around wherever, and people are not doing the research that they need to be doing of what the laws are, where they can and can't carry, what is the gun safety. And I'm sure Nate can agree with me. Two big things in the military are training and accountability. And we're a state right now that essentially doesn't have either when it comes to guns and it comes to training and permits and that. So that's really just what I wanted to add. Basically just, reaffirming what Nate had put out. And recently Texas went to a permitless carry like Indiana did. But prior to that, they were one of the best states when it came to gun safety and permitting requirements.
Yeah, it's interesting to see this happening when it should be going the completely opposite way. Getting rid of the permit to carry is just something that I don't understand. I don't think that I'll ever understand what they're thinking with that. Representative Garcia Wilburn, is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation before we take audience questions?
Well, I love the common thread that responsible gun ownership is also patriotic. And I love my country just as much as the next person. And outside my house, we have the American flag flying proudly. And I had somebody come up the other day and just say, I just love seeing another Republican in the neighborhood. And I'm like, my hair is in a messy knot, and I've got just like sweats on, and so I clearly was not recognizable. And I said, what made you say that? And they said, well, because you got your flag out. And I said, you know what? this country is meant for everybody. And there's so much more that identifies me than just a political party. I said, we can both agree on is that we both love America. And he just like eyes wide open. And so back to that comment of like, we've got 2 former veterans on this call. We have an impassioned father. There are so many things that make up our identities. I'm a mom. So, being motherhood, I'm a researcher, all of these things. Let us get to know one another again. Let us get to sit around a table and have conversations. Let our children be in the classroom without wondering if their teacher has a gun on them. These are the reality of our modern day age. My children will never grow up in a time where they don't have gun safety drills, active shooter drills. That is a frightening reality. I will never forget the day when my then 6-year-old son came home and said, "Mama, I know what I'm going to do if a bad guy enters the building." And my heart just sank. And I was afraid to ask, "What are you going to do, son?" But I mustered up the courage to show him that I could be brave too. And I said, "Son, what's your plan?" And he said, "I'm going to run as fast as I can in the woods so that no one can find me," because his school backed up to a woods. Could you imagine? At 6 years old, going to school and thinking about, if a bad guy enters my building, what will I do? That is the environment that we have built for our children, Hoosiers. And I know you don't want that. I know you want better. Take a chance. Take a chance on meeting Joel. Take a chance on getting to know Nate. Schedule a meeting with Matt McNally. Email my office. I promise you, as been said before, we have more that unites us than divides us.
100%. Let me wipe my eyes really quick. That was, I'm sure anybody who is a parent on this call can understand that. It is a very real fear. I think all of us, our situational awareness is so much more pumped up now. Every time I go to the park with my kids, I'm looking, is there a bag that's been left somewhere? At Pride events, I seen a bag in a parking lot at Indy Pride the other day, and I immediately was like, oh my gosh. And, this is the reality that we live in. This is not the reality that we want to leave our children, though. We have to do something to stop it now. Oh, so, Joel or Nate, is there anything that you guys would like to add to this before we move on to audience questions?
Bill, you can go ahead, brother.
I mean, it's hard to follow what Victoria just said, but like, as a parent, there's just such a common thread here of just addressing violence. Like, these rules are trying to limit this violent thread that has always been in this country, but continues to sort of rear its ugly head here. And as a parent, I mean, I just think when you think about misconceptions, I guess 2 do come to mind. And I'll just sort of say them real quickly. Like, one is background checks infringe on my Second Amendment right. And when I'm at door knocking and I'm just like that's just not true. Like, you can still carry, like, there are other states, Illinois, that have done this and continue to function, and like, they still have their Second Amendment right. But I think the second one that just hits home to me, just as a parent, is just what you're seeing in Tennessee of just like, the answer is arming teachers, like somehow like preventing violence with more violence. It's just heaping trauma upon trauma. And that solution just does not compute with me. And as a parent, like, that cannot be our solution for keeping our children safe. It just can't, because what you're seeing is an environment of growing up just living in fear. And there has to be a way where we can have responsible gun ownership and safety, and they don't have to be at odds with each other. Like, they don't have to be at odds. So as a father, I just want to leave this state a better place for my son, a safer place for my son. And that's why we're here, Republican or Democrat. Hopefully we can find that common ground. But that's why I'm running, and hopefully we can see some safer policies this year and next year.
Thank you, Joel. I do want to take an opportunity to bring up our supermajority did try to pass legislation to arm teachers. I also want to bring up the fact that there was legislation to take back training from teachers, and one of those things was heavy bleeding. Some teachers are trained in how to stop heavy bleeding. So something that really struck me was, okay, we're going to arm teachers, and what happens when they shoot one of their students and they can't stop that bleeding? You know, it's all these little things that we're pulling back on all the safety measures and deregulating and causing chaos. And I think that these little bits of policy making and legislation really go to show how dangerous the supermajority is and how they're not thinking clearly on what safety really looks like for Hoosiers. And Nate, I know you wanted to add something to the conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Arming teachers is a terrible idea. Absolutely atrocious. We are talking about our educators who go to college, who want to give back and educate our future leaders. They're not. The last thing they need to do is to worry about having a locked up gun somewhere in their classrooms. Let's also look through that the lens of law enforcement, responding law enforcement. It is going to set that teacher up for absolute failure. Okay, there's already a high risk of a uniformed officer accidentally shooting another uniformed officer in a critical incident like that. It's already pretty high. It's called blue on blue force. It's already pretty high. Let alone now you have a teacher who's in civilian clothes who the officer's going to think that's the active killer right there. You know, it's just a terrible idea tactically, and it's just not the right answer. It's like literally putting a Band-Aid on something that needs a tourniquet. It doesn't make any sense, you know. So we're all in this race to add common sense to our policies and provide that balance. That's why we're in this race. Our kiddos are doing active killer drills just like you and I did fire drills and tornado drills. It is a part of the monthly drill checklist, and that's what the reality is. When I go to work, I am constantly hyper vigilant along with my peers because we know that there is serious threats, and that percentage will tell you, the numbers will tell you, it's going to be an insider threat. Some poor kid that has access to weapons that aren't properly stored. And that's exactly what happened with the most of the active killing events that happened in our own backyard. Noblesville, perfect example, unsecured firearms. That kid was able to get a hold of that. Richmond, they had their guns locked up, but it was in a non-safe gun lock box, and that's how that kid was able to get in. And there was always signs too, and the parents just ignored the signs. So I think what we should do is just learn from the past and not let those terrible instances and those deaths be in vain, and use it as a learning point. There's a reason why we have a seatbelt law, right? It's because we learned from accidents. We learned, right? There's a reason why there's regulations on the auto industry of what they can and cannot put in vehicles. We have recalls all the time because obviously as accidents happen, we learn like, oh, actually that's a piece that's jacked up, needs to be recalled, right? So we just need to wake up a little bit and realize this is not about taking guns away, but it's about common sense stuff that, like I already said, protects your constitutional rights, while ensures that we are adding layers of safety and deterrence to those folks who shouldn't be in possession of firearms. And what does that technology do? It's designed to kill people. That's exactly what it's designed to do. That's what a firearm is. It is designed to shoot and kill, right? So we want to make sure those folks that are using that technology are trained, pass the background check, aren't criminals, and are good stewards of that responsibility.
Thank you, Nate. And I realized earlier when I was talking about the legislation, we did have a bill passed that allows teachers to open carry in Indiana. It is up to the school district to decide how that happens. I do want to point out that there was no language in the bill that discusses how these firearms are to be stored, which is very common for our supermajority. They write a lot of laws that leave a lot up for, up in the air. We don't know how to understand some of the bills that are being written. So I did want to correct that because I realized it sounded like that bill had not passed, and unfortunately it has. Hopefully this will not be normalized and will not be taken advantage of in Indiana. And thank you to all of you. Really great answers. And like I said, everybody touched on all of these questions just naturally. I think that all of this, we all agree, common sense gun laws need to happen here in Indiana. And I think we have a lot of people on this call right now who are going to keep moving forward in that fight. And I just want to say I appreciate you so much. I know running for office is not an easy task, and you guys are all just regular people, regular Hoosiers, just like the rest of us who want the best for their neighbors. And so I appreciate you putting yourselves out there on this line that many, many others wouldn't even dare to come close to. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on gun policy in Indiana with us. It was such a pleasure hearing from all of you. Julia, we are so appreciative of Moms Demand Action's advocacy in this space. And candidates, we wish you all the best of luck on your campaign. To learn more about our MVP candidates and the 2024 election, check out MADVoters on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and at madvoters.org, where you will find our ballot buddy and all kinds of great information about candidates across Indiana and these 4 amazing candidates that were with you today. And Julia, if you would like to close it out with giving people an idea of how they can get in contact with Moms Demand Action.
Yeah, absolutely. People can actually email us at Indiana chapter leaders at momsdemandaction.org, or you can just easily find us on the social media and on our website, World Wide Web, momsdemandaction.org.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody.